At first, we would like to thank you for accepting our invitation. So, which methodology is used for compiling the World Press Freedom Index?
Uses two approaches, the quantitative and the qualitative approach. Within the quantitative approach, we count the number of press freedom violations, for example, physical attacks on journalists. And as part of the qualitative approach, we have respondents, a panel of experts, journalists, lawyers, sociologists, etc., which are not linked to political parties. We have this panel of experts fill in a questionnaire. This questionnaire is public. This whole methodology is very detailed, explained in detailed way on our website. And using these two approaches, we determine the score of each country. And based on the score, which is from 0 to 100, 100 being the best, we determine the World Press Freedom Index, the order of the countries. And this score is broken down to 5 indicators of press freedom, which are the political context, legal framework, economic context, the social, cultural context, and safety. And we compile the data and all the information throughout the year using our own expertise here in the headquarters in Paris, but also using sources on the ground in each country. And the experts that I mentioned that fill in the questionnaire, they are based for the most part in the countries that are concerned.
Okay. So which position is held by Cyprus in 2023, and has it improved in comparison with the previous years?
So Cyprus' position, sorry, there is an echo, but it should be fine now. Cyprus' position in the new World Press Freedom Index is 55th out of 180 countries. Cyprus improved its ranking by 10 places, and its score, the quality of press freedom, by 2.65 points. You can see that while this improvement in terms of places can be impressive, 10 places, the score actually doesn't change so much. It's a slight improvement. And eventually, Cyprus remains in the second half of the EU member states at the same position. So it is 22nd out of 27 EU member states.
Okay. Which factors determine Cyprus' position? And have you detected any positive findings, maybe?
Yes, there was definitely a positive development. The journalists' code of ethics was updated to include editorial independence and strengthen approach to issues such as discrimination, protection of children, gender, health, sex crimes, and suicide. And also there is discussion, which is a positive signal, about a draft bill in the parliament on the transparency of ownership of media channels. And the goal of that bill is to create transparency so that we know the real owners of these media. What needs to be improved in Cyprus is the independence in general of media. Today we observe opaque relations between government and the media, sometimes direct interference in the editorial work. Also, another issue is growing media concentration. And the reason why Cyprus needs a law about transparency of media ownership is that it's especially a problem on the whole media landscape concerning channels, but also print and digital media. And I would also say that journalists are regularly targeted by verbal attacks by politicians.
Okay, so what are your recommendations for journalists in Cyprus? What can be done about all this?
Well, I think the draft bill on the transparency of media ownership is a good basis. It should be adopted based on the consultation with the journalists, with the media, and also based on the best European practices. There is a European legislation on media freedom proposed by the European Commission, and this new national legislation should be in phase, should be I would say should correspond to this European approach. Politicians, government should refrain from interfering in editorial independence. It may be beneficial for them in the short term, but on the long term, they undermine actually the trust of the society in the media, which then becomes a problem also for them, because it undermines basically the trust in what people watch and what we see in the media, including politicians. It's also important that the police prosecute crimes against journalists. I deplore that the writer and investigative journalist Makarios Drusiotis was under surveillance. It was not investigated. There is no justice served, and moreover, when he published his book, he has become a target of a lawsuit by police officers. And we have to say that recently the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg found that the Republic of Cyprus violated Drusiotis' freedom of expression. So it's really important to make these reforms on the legislative level, to have the police investigate cases of surveillance. I mean, there were other important affairs of surveillance in Greece. We have a similar problem, although in much bigger proportion than in Cyprus. And we need to establish a political culture where journalists are not attacked by politicians.
And on the other hand, there's Norway. Norway holds the first position in the index for years. What is their success attributed to?
Sorry, you said Norway, right?
Yeah.
Norway, yes. Yes, Norway traditionally is on the first place in the World Press Freedom Index. Well, if you look at the various indicators, you can really see the best practice. In the political context, there are no verbal attacks on journalists from politicians. Moreover, government defends press freedom not only at home but also abroad. There is a really strong tradition. When you look at the economic context, the relationships between the state and the media are very transparent. Public funding, public advertisement is distributed in a very equitable, transparent way. When there is an economic crisis, the state comes to help the media. If you look at the legal framework, basically there are no abusive lawsuits, no defamation complaints against journalists. It's very rare. And police prosecute crimes against journalists. They do happen even in countries like Norway. But really what is important is that they are efficiently prosecuted. And even if the police don't defend press freedom or journalists, and the prosecution don't defend journalists, the courts of Norway do. And a few more words about security. There is a mechanism for protection of journalists and for prevention of attacks against them. In general, journalists are rarely physically attacked in Norway, but also in other Nordic countries. And I would say that Norway is not a country without problems. If you look at the score, it doesn't have 100 points either. But, even if there are problems, like sometimes verbal attacks of extremist parties or online harassment, the approach of institutions and politicians is very media freedom friendly.
Okay, and one last question. Are you optimistic about the future for the journalism and the journalists, about the press freedom and how the things are going? Are you optimistic?
I'm optimistic by nature, and it's also our work at RSF to work towards better protection of journalists and towards more visibility of professional journalistic content. This is very, very important because social networks, platforms, and actually propaganda today, like the one coming from Russia in Europe, pushes this professional news to the margins and puts in the center of the public debate fake news, disinformation, propaganda, not only of Russia, but also China. And our role as RSF is to improve physical protection of journalists, to have crimes against them prosecuted, to award media which respect journalistic ethics in the eyes of the regulators and in the eyes of the social networks on which they depend, like Facebook or Twitter. This is why we have the Journalism Trust Initiative. So this is to support journalistic ethics. And our role is finally to make platforms, social networks respect and put more visibility to professionally produced news. And this is why we have an initiative directed to governments. Cyprus is also a signatory of Information and Democracy, which was launched as an intergovernmental initiative by RSF. So, and this is a place where we propose practical recommendations how to change legislation and make social networks, platforms favor trustworthy journalism and put back the fake news and the rumors and the hate on the social media back to the margins.
Okay, thank you very much for